Hi, welcome to the Three Tynes podcast. Music can be found everywhere in our lives, and it is often so prevalent that we may not notice it. But one musical form can be heard in most villages and towns, and it's worth a momentary pause to listen, because then you will hear the sound of church bells. Today's episode is devoted to the carillon, an instrument for playing church bells that is an alternative to bell ringing by pulling ropes. The carillon is often, but not exclusively, found in smaller churches with 4 to 12 bells. These may be buildings with towers that are too small or not strong enough to cope with the huge forces generated by pulling ropes. The carillon is not exactly rare, but neither is it common. In the Three Tynes area, I have found only 2 churches with carillons, St Augustine's in Alston and Holy Trinity Church in Whitfield. We will hear them both. It is a little known fact that the Civic Centre in Newcastle has a carillon, and with 25 bells weighing a total of 22 tons, it is the heaviest 2-octave carillon in the world. John Bradley is the carillonist for Newcastle City Council. He plays the bells on civic occasions and performs a recital every Friday afternoon. John gives us a potted history of the carillon and recounts the story of how the Newcastle instrument came to be. John plays a huge repertoire, and he performs one of his own compositions, The Autumn Leaves, from a suite of miniatures called the Chromaticas. First, I talked to Josephine Dickinson, the carillonist at St Augustine's Church in Alston. Josephine is an accomplished musician who has been deaf since childhood. In our conversation, she talks about her experience of music in all its forms, and of discovering her enthusiasm for playing the carillon. And we travel to Whitfield and Newcastle to hear these contrasting instruments. Three Tynes podcast is known for its inclusive approach to animals, and I miss no opportunity to give them their moment in the limelight. Josephine and I recorded our conversation in the tower of St Augustine's Church, and if you listen carefully, you will hear the pigeons. We start the episode with Josephine's performance of the traditional tune New Road to Alston, appropriately played on the Alston carillon. Josephine Dickinson, thank you for talking to Three Tynes podcast.
It's a great pleasure, thank you.
Can you tell me how you came to be playing the carillon here in Alston?
My friend Alex Martin played it every Sunday. I didn't attend the Anglican church in those days, so I hadn't heard it myself. But one day, Bar and Mark organised an open day for the church, and they had all sorts of activities going on in the church as part of what they called Alston Aspire. And one of those activities was to open the tower up for anybody to come and have a go on the bells. So I'd often heard about Alex playing the bells. I thought I'd come up and see what it was all about and maybe have a go myself. And that day I played some pieces and really enjoyed it. And to my delight, Alex invited me to come and play with her every Sunday from then on. So 2 or 3 years we were playing every Sunday together, and that was great fun. And we used to take it in turns playing tunes and egg each other on, encourage each other, tell each other when something didn't work. And it was so wonderful. But sadly, Alex became poorly and couldn't do it anymore. It was too much for her. So for the past 6 or 7 years, I've been playing them on my own.
So when you first came here, you'd never seen a carillon before?
No, I hadn't.
But you managed to pick up the rudiments straight away?
Yes, well, it's not complicated mechanically. It's 10 bells with C to C arranged in a row of what looked like saucepan handles, and then a row of 2 above representing F sharp and B flat. They're not actually the actual sounding pitches.
Mm-hmm. But you're being a bit modest because you are in fact a musician.
Yes.
And you are a kind of a special musician because you're a musician who's had a lifetime in music with hearing loss.
Yes.
Can you tell me how your experience of that has been?
In my home, it was a poor working class home, and we had an upright piano, and we also had another upright piano that was falling apart, and half the notes didn't play. And my older brother and sister both played the piano, and I was 5 years younger than my sister, so I grew up hearing them play. I and my younger brother were allowed to play on the broken piano, so we used to tell stories on the keyboard and generally mess about. Then, when I woke up one morning at the age of 6 and couldn't hear anything, it never occurred to me that I wouldn't go on to have piano lessons like my older brother and sister. The teacher was a very good teacher who went to the same church as my parents, which was a Catholic church, and she taught us all for virtually no money. That was how we were able to learn. But when I got to the age of 7, and by then I had hearing aids, my mother thought I wouldn't be bothering to learn the piano, but I was adamant that I wanted to learn. And so my mother allowed me to have lessons, and that was how I started. And when I went to secondary school, I was lucky enough to be in the London Borough of Merton, where at state schools you could have tuition in an orchestral instrument and borrow an instrument of next to nothing. And so I tried several different instruments. And then I progressed through the grades like anyone else and took grade 8 in the 6th form. And then just continued my my studies.
That's a very high standard, grade 8.
Through university, yes.
Isn't it? Grade 8 is a very high standard.
Yes.
For piano, yeah.
Yes, I passed with distinction.
Wow.
And then I went to university, and after that I studied for and took my licentiateship of the Royal Academy of Music. And then I was teaching piano. After a few years of that, I took piano lessons with a composer, Michael Finney, and he suggested, by then I was publishing poetry, so he suggested I study music composition, which I did for several years with him and with Richard Barrett. After that, I moved to Cumbria, and I've been here for 31 years now.
Yeah. Almost a native now.
Yes.
Almost, but not quite.
Yes. Yes, well, I married a native, and I feel like a native now.
Yeah.
Mm.
Now, you mentioned the carillon
Yes.
it looks like a thing with broom handles, like a scale set out in a row, a scale of notes set out in a row.
Yes, that's
broom
right,
handles.
yes.
What is the experience of playing a carillon like to you?
It's very physical. In essence, it's very similar to playing the piano, actually, because with the piano you're connected with the string through a mechanism which is to a certain degree separated from you, but you still have that direct contact with a string. Well, indirect, but it's still connected through a mechanism. The mechanism may be slightly different here, but it's basically the same. You depress a key and it pulls a cable which activates a hammer.
And if you pull it harder, is the note louder?
Yes,
Right.
definitely. And there's a certain threshold to produce a sound. Most people, when they first try to make a sound on the carillon, they don't quite reach that threshold, and they depress the key without making a sound. You have to depress the key with a certain velocity, and then the hammer will hit strike the bell and produce a sound. And also, depending on the speed with which you depress the lever or the key, that the note can be softer or louder. And also, if you play with acceleration of velocity, that can affect the tone of the resultant note.
Yeah.
So you can, in the same way that you can make a piano sing, you can also make the bells sing by the way you play the apparatus, the keys, the physical instrument.
Yeah. In Alston, at St Augustine's Church, we have carillon with 10 bells.
Yes.
So it spans an octave, so we have 8 notes plus 2 accidentals.
Mm.
What scope do you have for playing different types of music? What are the limitations imposed by having only access to those notes?
When I first started, I found that quite a severe limitation. But in fact, the longer I played, the more I've realised that you can adapt many tunes. You are obviously limited in keys by just having the C to C white note plus F sharp and B flat. But many tunes can be moved up or down to fit within that, or they can be adapted. But it does depend on the tune, how much you can adapt it. If it's a very recognisable tune, then you can conceivably move part of it, move a whole chunk of it perhaps, down, play in different registers, which people will not notice because they know the tune so well.
Yeah.
They'll just take it on board.
Yeah. It's the melody line of a tune that you're focusing on, and the harmonics are kind of missing, because you can do that with bells because they have such a long sustain and they generate their own harmonics, don't
Yes,
they?
exactly, yes.
So you don't actually need a bass line like you would with the left hand of a
No,
piano.
it has its own harmony. It's a beautiful harmony and a beautiful way of sounding and being sustained harmonically. And sometimes if a note is absent completely in the correct register and it really feels as if it's needed, then I can sound softly a note in the same chord, and if I can, find the note an octave below and then sound it an octave below together with another note in the same chord, and that can help to fill the gap, because the hearing sense is amazingly creative. What I found through my deafness is that we don't hear in the ear, we hear in the brain. I mean, I'm totally deaf, but I have an implant. But before I had the implant, there was a period when I couldn't use hearing aids, and I had this experience of very intense musical creations in my brain. That they would be called hallucinations, but they were real. They were my brain hearing real music, because all my life I've had a rich sound world through my hearing aids. The brain doesn't like being cut off from sensation.
Mm-hmm.
So if it loses that, it will create its own, and it
Yeah.
can do what it wants, basically,
Yeah.
with its own memories. So I learned that was how I hear, and now I realise that how people hear the melodies on the bells is largely what their brain makes of it, depending on the input you give them.
And
Yes.
this is a very real phenomenon, isn't it? Because anybody who has hearing loss of any degree will know that they have
Yes.
ringing in their ears, or tinnitus, which is
Yes,
the brain
tinnitus.
recreating the sound
Yes.
that they can't hear anymore.
Was a variation of that, but it was very extreme. But I experienced it before in my life as well, of course. This is why it must be so difficult for very young children who are born deaf and have no sound input. If they're given a cochlear implant, they have to start to build those memories from scratch. So they have to be trained to hear with the implant. But it's important to remember that the implant itself is limited. It's an amazing piece of technology, but it's basically a tiny computer on the outside of the ear with a small receiver implanted under the skin, which has connected to it an array of electrodes that go into the inner ear. And in my case, I've got one with 22 electrodes that are laid on the nerve beds of the inner ear, where the nerve cells would be in a healthy ear. But the ear of a hearing person, a healthy ear, typically has around 20,000 of those nerve cells that act in exquisite synchronization with each other. And they're obviously exquisitely tuned to the input they receive and can use those to send signals to the brain. The implant, on the other hand, with its 22 electrodes in my case, is laid on the nerve bed and stimulates it, but is obviously not able to recreate in any way that synchronization or sensitivity, differentiation of pitch. So it creates a very, very granular, poorly resolved sound picture, which has to be sent to the brain and interpreted there. Because I have a very rich memory of sounds that I learned from before I became profoundly deaf at the age of 6, and afterwards with my hearing aids, my brain was able to use those memories to create sounds, to create experiences of sounds. What I hear when I listen to your voice or the birds or the bells is something that's largely created in my brain with the help of all the memories that I have there. And because of the anatomical position of the electrodes, they're positioned nearer the opening of the inner ear, which is where we hear high frequencies. I'm able to hear high frequencies better than low frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hear low frequencies well at all. For example, I can't hear cars on the road and that sort of thing. And I don't hear male voices as well. But I can hear birds. And in fact, I hear birds better than many hearing people,
Mm-hmm.
and better than I did before. That's one of the few areas where my current level of hearing is an improvement.
Yeah.
Because I had very poor high frequency hearing before. Though I know that even though it feels marvellous to me, it is very limited because, again, it's all centred on those few electrodes and they're very crude messages to my brain. But with that, I'm able to construct a sound world.
Do you think that you are able to perceive lower sounds if they're loud enough? I'm thinking we're here in the tower in St. Augustine's, and when you play the bells, they are quite loud. So the deeper harmonics almost resonate in your body. Do you think you perceive those?
Yes, I think there is that phenomenon, and I hear the harmonics and the resonances that linger on because the bells are very complex. Each one has a very complex sound. I don't really hear low frequencies well at all, but the little thread with the electrodes on, it rests at the opening and then it turns round a little bit inside. It's about 1.5 inches long. Although it doesn't touch the lower frequency areas, somehow it does transmit along there somehow. I
Kind of
think.
an overspill.
Even though it's not actually positioned there. I feel it does give me some lower frequency hearing, but very limited.
I think it's something about rock music, very loud music, played with guitars and drums and bass.
Yes.
What people didn't understand when that became popular first in the 60s and 70s is that the sheer volume that you listen to that music at has a physical impact on your body when you're standing in front of the stage, doesn't it? And people didn't understand the importance of that when they didn't know about it themselves.
Yes.
So I think the physical effect of music, if it's loud enough, is very important to the way that you experience it.
Yes, it is very much so. Yes, I've had two experiences that were particularly striking for me in the past 12 or 13 years since I had the implant. One was when I took part in a project with Octopus Collective in Alston. They call themselves Full of Music now, and I've done many things with them. They're marvellous people. Andrew Deakin, one of the directors, came to this church a few years ago and did an installation with sounds and images connected with my experience of sound. But when I first came across them in 2014, not long after I'd had the implant, we went on a sound walk and recorded sounds in and around Alston. And later in the year, a few of us who had been composers made pieces and performed them at a concert. And we were upstairs in the Cook building. But there's a wonderful space upstairs which is like an attic, and they set up all these giant speakers there. And one of the pieces was incredible. It made you feel as if there was a monster pacing around the room. You could just feel it in your body.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that. The other experience was when I went to Manchester's Bridgewater Hall. I was giving a poetry reading there, but while I was there they gave me a pass for the weekend's concert. Normally I've not bothered much with big orchestras because I simply can't hear them very well, but this weekend they had a programme with 10 or 12 new pieces for big orchestra by graduating students from Manchester. It may have been the Northern College of Music. And, oh gosh, because I was there with a pass, I was able to sit at the front. And the orchestra was so huge that it surrounded you almost. And the sound was completely all-encompassing. It was like a bodily experience. And because the students were each using the orchestra as much as they possibly could and in as many different ways as they could, there was so much information in that music and I could pick up on it. And it was the most wonderful orchestral experience I've ever had. But normally one wouldn't necessarily get access to that sort of thing. But it was so wonderful, and this is why I've always loved new music, because it exploits to the full the depth of what you can do, what you can convey and experience in the musical bandwidth, which is so much bigger than speech. Speech is the difficult thing, and I think speech operates in a narrower range of wavelengths, whereas music is almost infinite. And in fact, I don't know if you know a letter that Beethoven wrote to his brother about his deafness. Well, it was about his deafness, amongst other things, called the Heiligenstadt Testament. And he said that deafness had affected him socially, in his relationships with other human beings, far more than in his experience of music. And that was what made him feel down about deafness. And that is so true. Most people find Beethoven amazing because he was a great composer. That was his real greatness, that he experienced this terrible loss of human connection through his hearing, and he had no access to hearing aids or implants, of course.
So you bring this great depth of experience and musical knowledge to the carillon. What repertoire do you play on it?
Well, I play every week before the main Sunday service at 11, so obviously I play the hymns they're going to sing as much as I can when they're playable on the carillon, which they mostly are actually. And I play other hymns according to the season, and I try to include hymns that are sung by other Christian denominations on the moor, the Methodists and the Catholics, as well as the Anglicans. And I also developed my repertoire of secular music to play for the people on the moor who may not go to church at all. I see it as a community asset because it can be heard for miles around, apparently. I arrange all sorts of things. I'm always on the lookout for new music I can play, and I've found folk music especially a rich source. Mm-hmm. Another rich source of tunes is harp music, okay, which I found to be very suitable when arranged. Also, bagpipe music and many popular tunes. For example, I've arranged popular tunes from the pantos on Alston Moor in recent years, and I plan to do more of those. So it's a very versatile instrument, and people do respond to the tunes. Mm-hmm. They recognise them. Yes. And I think I'm improving in my ability to arrange things and play them as well. Mm-hmm. Though it's a challenge at all times, of course, because it's a very idiomatic instrument, and there are some pieces that suit it better than others naturally. It is a joy to be somewhere and to realise that you can hear the bells playing, whether it's a peal of bells as you might have at Hexham Abbey on a Thursday night when they're practising, or indeed on a Sunday morning. Yes, I would play a peal of bells when if I play for a wedding. At the end of a wedding, Alex taught me this, we would just play the downward scale over and over and over as fast as we could, you know. And I can remember being on holiday on Arran several years ago. My wife and I were out cycling in the countryside, and we just sat down for our lunch by the roadside. We just sat there, and then all of a sudden it dawned on us, oh, somebody's playing a tune. And it was such a small church, I think it must have been a carillon. But as far as I understand it, the church has closed down now. But it was delight just to sit there and realise, oh, there's a tune. Oh yes, that's fascinating. And so often people say to me, I enjoyed listening to the bells playing tunes. And that was what amazed me most, to hear the tunes playing, and we were singing along and that sort of thing. Yeah, quite so. Yes. Yeah. And I mentioned to you that we were cycling into Alston on, I think it was Easter Sunday, and as we arrived we heard the bells, and I said to my wife, there's Josephine, and we listened for a while. It's lovely. Oh, that's wonderful. Lovely. Thank you. We're here in Alston, where we have our 10-bell carillon, which you're used to playing. We've also visited Whitfield, which is nearby, where they have an 8-bell carillon.
Sarah Blackett-Ord, thank you for talking to Three Tynes podcast. Can I ask you to just give me a brief description of the history of Whitfield Church?
Whitfield Church, there are actually two churches in Whitfield. This church was built in 1860 by the Blackett-Ords, and the original parish church is on the road to Hawkwhistle. There was apparently a place of worship there since about the 8th century, but it's quite a small church, and this church was built to accommodate the farmers and mining community of the valleys here. And it was known as the Cathedral of the Allen Valleys because it's got a very high stone spire, and it's quite large.
And how did the carillon come to be here?
The carillon was a gift from my late father-in-law. who wanted to commemorate his wife who died in 1977, and he gave the carillon as a lasting memory of her.
Mm-hmm. And how often is it played?
It's played once a month for services here, but it's also played for weddings if people would like to have them.
Oh, right. So if somebody was interested in carillons and wanted to hear a performance, it would be a normal church service.
A normal church service. It's before the service, about a quarter of an hour before. The services take place at 11 o'clock in the morning on the third Sunday of the month. Mm-hmm. So that's precisely when people can hear the carillon, although I'm sure it could be played in between. People requested. And
are you able to tell me anything about the carillon itself? It's unusual for us because we've seen carillons played with a system of levers, but you have a keyboard. This
is a keyboard. It's a small keyboard in a wooden box, and it connects to the chimes which are in the tower, and it rings out beautifully when you're in the vicinity of the church, but it's not quite as loud as normal bells would be ringing up and down the valley. Mm-hmm. So it's very attractive, though.
Yeah. I imagine that was a deliberate choice because the bells were cast for this church, so they must have had in mind at the time that they didn't want something ringing up and down the valley.
Yes, perhaps that's the case. I'm not sure about that. Yes.
Yeah. And how many carillonists do you have playing?
We have two.
Oh, right.
We have somebody from the next door area of Ninebanks, which is part of our parish, and we have someone who's played them for many years who lives just at the top of the hill, and she has played them for a long time, and she's very good at playing. She's also an organist, so she's very musical.
Right. Well, we can hear Josephine playing in the background.
Yes.
So we'll go and have a listen to her.
Lovely.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Can you compare and contrast your experience of playing the two?
Well, my first impression when I played their carillon was that I couldn't hear it because the clavier, which is a very different clavier to this one, was situated not directly below the bells, apparently because of the architecture of the church, but in a side room, a kind of sacristy. Very nice space, but it was too far away from the bells for me to hear, but also there was no physical sensation because the clavier was an electronic clavier which operated the clappers. So the 8 bells were arranged on the E major scale exclusively, with the leading note, D sharp, situated an octave lower. So it required transposing everything to E major and remembering to play the leading note, the octave lower. Yeah. It's just a matter of transposing things and arranging things specially. And I think it would have a very large repertoire of its own, but it would take a long time to get used to not having that direct control of the sound.
Now, we also went to the Civic Centre in Newcastle as guests of John Bradley, the official carillonist, who very generously gave his time to us on one Friday when he was doing his recitation. And the carillon in Newcastle has 20...
Is it 25?
I think it's 25.
Yes.
My name is John Bradley. I am the City Carillioner of Newcastle upon Tyne, and I played the wonderful 25 bell carillon that surmounts the Civic Centre of Newcastle upon Tyne. Carillon started life in the sort of like the very early 1700s, in the back end of the 16th century, and they started their lives as time-telling devices because in those days people didn't have wristwatches, they didn't have pocket watches, and they were completely reliant on the municipal clock towers of the day. The problem was, if you missed the first strike or the first couple of strikes, then you were completely lost off as to what time it was. Then what happened? People devised a way of the clock tower playing a small little melody before the actual announcement of the time. In Dutch, that's known as the voorslag. Literally, the voorslag, the tune before the hour. That's essentially what it roughly translates to. And they came up with the idea, the people of the day, they came up with the idea of dead hanging a sequence of bells in a frame that was sequenced off a big rotating mechanical drum. The idea being a minute or a couple of minutes, say, before the actual hour strike. Little tune played, people stopped talking about the cows or how soggy the fields were, and they knew to listen out for the time. Now, that's really where the idea of dead hanging bells came from. But in around about 1615, unknown man from Alston who came up with the idea of taking out that removable programmed drum, that pin drum, and it moves the clappers and it rings the bells. They removed that mechanical drum and instead came up with the idea of lifting all of that transmission with a bunch of broomsticks, pretty much like what we're in front of now. And it was the man from Alston, that we don't know who he was, he invented the first clavier. And that's, in 1615, that's where our first breech action carillon came from. In all of that passing of time, of the hundreds of years, very, very, very little has changed. We still play carillons with wooden baton action claviers. They in turn drop these metal rods down, the metal rods in turn rotate pieces of transmission upstairs in the belfry above our heads, and in turn that brings the clapper onto the soundbar of a bell and it rings the bell.
And how did a carillon come to be in the civic centre?
Our carillon is named after Edith Adamson. Edith was the wife of James Adamson. James Adamson was a little bit of a local hero. He was the CEO of then British Paints. In 1963, following a long and happy marriage with Edith, Edith sadly died, and James donated the then pricely sum of around about £21,000 to the newly forming Newcastle Council to build and erect a carillon in memory of his late wife. Now, you might very well ask, why did James pay for a carillon? And it is likely, although never confirmed, that James and Edith were first enamoured by carillons in 1929. This is not the first carillon that was in Newcastle. Now, in 1929, we had the great coastal exhibition of the North East, which was on for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then the very enterprising bell foundry Gillett and Johnson of Croydon had a whopping huge contract to make the carillon of New Zealand. It was the War Memorial Carillon in Wellington. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to show the bells off. So they approached the then authorities of Newcastle, which appreciably were much different as they are now. And they basically asked, would it be all right if we can ship our bells down and make a small temporary building and do some carillon concerts to, show off our wonderful instrument? The answer was yes. That's exactly what they did. And we had our first carillon on the town moor in Newcastle for about 2 or 3 weeks. And people absolutely loved it. And it's likely that James and Edith heard those bells when they were then courting. And it's probably that James had the idea to donate a carillon in Edith's memory. The carillon can be played largely in two ways. Our baton clavier is a pure mechanical device. When you depress one of the buttons, it brings down a rod that in turn rotates a rod. That energy is then transferred to the clapper, which then turns against the bell. That's the first way of playing it. Just behind you is our sequencer. That operates slightly differently. When you push a key down on the keyboard, that electrically sends a signal to a relay panel here. That goes all the way upstairs. That energises a set of voice coils on each of the clappers. That then gets the corresponding clapper to strike each bell accordingly.
So we've got 25 bells in the carillon.
Mm-hmm.
And that means you've got 25 levers there, doesn't it?
That's right, yep.
So that requires some dexterity and energy to play, I imagine.
It does, and don't forget, we've also got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 pedals for the feet. The pedals address the first bottom octave of the clavier. That's important because that can increase the number of notes that you're playing at once, and it also frees your hands up to do other things. This instrument is quite unusual in that we've got those two beautiful bells. We've got our bottom C sharp and our bottom D sharp. It's a bit uncommon to have that in carillons. For a carillon only of this size of 25 bells, it is highly unusual, and this is the heaviest in the world, with a combined bell weight of about 22 tonnes. So yes, it does need some dexterity.
And we've just been looking at the bells upstairs, and you showed us the biggest bell, and tell us a bit about that.
So our biggest bell, that's it's this one. And what you're actually hearing is a mixture of the sound of the bell, but also the sound of the clavier, and you're actually hearing the rattling of the frame, you're actually hearing the rattling of the rods, and you're also hearing the now very unforgiving felt on our clavier. So it sounds very clunky and clattery, and it sounds... So the experience that you hear outside is very, very different to what you hear inside. Our biggest bell is beautiful. It's got a width of about 6 feet, and it's got an all-up weight of about 3.6 tonnes. Although we play it as a C, as you can see, our clavier is arranged very much like the keys on a piano. All of our natural notes are on the bottom, all of our accidental notes are on the top. And although it's played as a C, it actually rings on a minor third. It actually rings 3 semitones down on, so the actual perceived strike note is an A.
And can you explain for us why that's so? Why does it not sound as a C?
Bells are incredibly interesting percussion instruments. They make their sound up by the mixture and the decay of all the different harmonics you get. Typically, the main harmonics that you'll find in a bell are the hum note, which is the octave below the strike note, the nominal, the one above, the tierce and the quint, the 13th and the 15th above. There are also, as you're aware, there are also many other harmonics that have got to be tuned. The actual precise reason why this instrument was set to transpose in A is as yet completely... we haven't actually found the document that says that. If anyone knows about this, please can you come forward and let me know, because we do have a few mysterious elements about this instrument. That's one of them. We would really like to know, other than the transposition does actually fit the belfry very well. The exact reason why that transposition was actually selected, we don't 100% know. We can guess, but we don't know for sure.
Right. But it was deliberate.
It was deliberate, yes.
And does it affect all the bells equally?
Absolutely, yes.
Wow.
So, if we ring the bottom C, you can actually hear that obviously an octave apart, but all of them are ringing concert through semitones down.
Yeah. So your carillon has got 25 bells, Josephine's has got 10.
Mm-hmm.
What are the similarities between the two, and apart from the number of bells, what are the differences?
The differences, I just learned that our instruments transpose similarly, which is wonderful. The only difference is that Josephine's instrument doesn't have as many accidental notes. Mm-hmm. I don't think your instrument has got foot pedals though.
No,
It's all on the hands? Yeah. That can actually make for a refreshing change from this, because unusually the approach, one of the common misnomers for being a carillon, people say, oh, you must have played the organ. Yes, I do have a bit of organ experience, but your approach is completely different. In most organs, the pedal division is a completely separate division of the organ, and it's got its own independent stops. The pedals on a carillon are actually the same bells. It sounds a very, very stupid thing to say, but you don't necessarily treat your feet as feet. You treat them almost as another pair of hands.
Other than the complexity of the repertoire, that's to say more notes and more complex harmonies, are the repertoires of the two instruments similar?
Very, very similar, and hopefully I'll demonstrate some of that.
Yeah, okay, well, would now be a good time for you to do that?
Absolutely. Now, why don't I open the...
You open the...
Why don't I open the door?
Yeah, I'm just going to go a bit further outside and get the...
Yeah, go for it.
So we get the more bells and less clavier.
Yeah.
Like that.
You can really, really feel, you are so fully connected with your music.
That's exactly how I feel as well,
Yeah.
even though I play on a much smaller carillon, and I feel somehow that the touch on here is quite light, but it still takes a lot of
It does.
energy,
yeah.
especially with so many
Yes.
bells to play. But I feel, I play in a church tower which is stone, and I feel somehow the bells transform that into a musical instrument. It's the tower.
Very much so, and I think when you're playing in a campanile, I think when you're playing in a building like this, you become part of that instrument yourself. You aren't just simply a player. You become a fully integrated.
Yes.
You become a fully integrated piece of that machine. You almost synergise with it, I think.
Yes.
Oh, I won't rapture on the team. That is one of the reasons why I particularly love playing it, because pre-refurbishment, our sequencer didn't have any form of loud or quiet, soft or hard hitting. It was just dong, 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 dong. So there was just one volume and it played it. You can't achieve dynamics very well on our sequencer, whereas you can with the mechanical instrument, and that is one of the other reasons why I love playing the mechanical side of the carillon so much.
That never occurred to me before, because the natural inclination is to think that because you're pulling on a wire rod, essentially, that you won't have a lot of sensitivity, but depending on how much power you put through that.
You do, and I think that is a very common misconception with bells in general, because of the size of them and the weight of them and the size of the clappers. I mean, you saw the size of the clappers, you know, some of them was the bigger than a cow's head, but you can achieve such surprising delicacy with these instruments, and it catches you unawares.
And what did you feel about playing this by contrast with the one in Alston?
It has its own personality completely, and sound. Obviously, there are many more bells, so it has very full and rich tone. The clavier itself has a lighter action than the one at St Augustine's, but because of the range, and there's a pedal board as well, it's very physical, because the whole instrument, you feel as if you're becoming part of the tower, and it's coming from somewhere inside your body. It's not something you use your hands to play, it's coming from everything.
For the layperson, that is to say me, the experience of standing here and hearing the clavier as well as the bells is fundamentally different to being on the outside, as it just was, where I can only hear the bells. And I wonder what your experience is when you're playing, because you're not only listening to the bells, are you? You're interacting with the physicality of this instrument, and it's, I don't wish to be unflattering, but it's not a delicate instrument in the sense that it requires a light touch. It requires a degree of physical input, doesn't it?
It does, and I think you become a little bit tuned out to hearing all of the extra percussive noises when you hear. Ironically, the only way that I can actually experience it as a listener is when someone else is playing it, or I hear recordings, and I think that just becomes the nature of the job.
So John, how often do you play the carillon?
So the Edith Adamson carillon gets played currently only by me. My understudy is my daughter Jenna, and that gets played once a week on a Friday between 1400 and 1500, unless otherwise stated on Facebook.
So is it played on special occasions, special civic ceremonies?
It is. It's whenever the council requests me to do so. It's played on Remembrance Sunday, and it's also played for other special occasions. I've played for art events. I played for the Novum Festival last year. I am actually a very, very powerful advocate for traditional music in Newcastle, and thankfully I've got good access to that because my wife plays Northumbrian small pipes as well. So thankfully she lends me her music.
So to be clear, traditional music would be...
you may have heard of tunes like Water of Tyne, My Bonny Lads, Safed Henny, Bonny at Morn. They all come out of the carillon.
So these are the fiddle tunes that people would play in?
Yeah, all of the traditional folk, fiddle, piping, sung music.
I find traditional tunes lend themselves very well when I can get them within the range of my 10-bell carillon. I play a lot of traditional tunes, like Irish tunes and jigs and reels and things like that. A lot of the hymns are actually composed music from people like Purcell or Handel.
Yeah, I play a lot of Purcell as well. I find the classical music that fits on this instrument very well. Purcell, I absolutely adore Purcell. Handel, Bach, Mozart, Elgar as well is sublime. I think, just to be absolutely clear, traditional music isn't the only repertoire that I play. I also play very, very contemporary repertoire as well. I also write music for the carillon as well.
Gosh, how exciting.
So would you play us one of your pieces?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Hang on a second.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
I'll just move it out of the way.
This is one of my pieces of music which I wrote for an old school friend in Oxford. It's part of my suite called the Chromaticas. This is number 10. It's written in D minor, and this is called The Autumn Leaves.
So you have 25 levers there as opposed to 10 that you're used to, and it's a much bigger operation because it's high up in the tower and the bells are enormous. How did you find that experience?
That was absolutely incredible. It was so inspiring to hear John talk about it, first of all, because he's so passionate and knowledgeable and committed to it, and he was so generous in the way he welcomed us, and he even allowed me to play a bit during his actual official recital, which I felt very honoured by. The clavier itself is arranged essentially in the same way as the clavier here, but obviously it's much bigger, and there's a bench, so it makes it look a little bit like an organ console, and added to that there's a clavier for feet, a pedal board, very similar to an organ, but it felt very different to sit down and play rather than as here stand and play. The levers are very similar to the ones here, but they have a lighter touch.
Which is surprising for a much bigger instrument, isn't it? It's
Yes,
somewhat easier to play physically.
It was so inspiring. It was wonderful to hear John playing from his huge repertoire of pieces, and because of the facility of having such a large range and a keyboard as well, his music came across as really romantic. He was playing all sorts of things, and I was. When we arrived at the Civic Centre that day, we stopped to have our sandwiches outside. I noticed that there was a Ukrainian flag flying.
Yes.
And I noticed that in particular because, and I said to you, I brought the Ukrainian national anthem to play if I get a chance. So I didn't know if it would be appropriate or not. But when we got up there with John and he was playing for us, he took out the Ukrainian national anthem and played it for us. And then later I played it as well, and so that was really special. I don't know what the people outside would have thought. Yes, that there are people who come to me after I played one Sunday and they say, you played my favourite tune.
Oh, that's nice.
And for example, there was one lady who was a visitor to Alston who was particularly fond of Now the Green Blade Riseth, the Easter tune, you know. And so I played it again for her after the service, and she was so thrilled. It really means so much when a tune has a particular meaning for someone, and I get the chance to play it again for them.
Let's hope that when this episode of the podcast is on the likes of Spotify, that people will realise, there are church bells to be heard, and there are carillons being played up and down the land.
Yes, absolutely, yes. I've become, since meeting you, Steve, before meeting you, I thought, I must be very much isolated. I must be the only one playing a carillon for hundreds of miles around. But since meeting you, I've come to the awareness of carillons all over the country. On John Bradley's recommendation, I've joined the Carillon Society of Britain and Ireland, and through that I've got so much information about lots and lots of carillons in the country. Some of them in Cumbria. I plan to visit in the near future.
Excellent. Because there are, if I remember correctly, there are 15 large ones, aren't there? Like the Newcastle one, which means over 23 bells, but there are probably several hundred smaller ones like here in Alston. But in our patch of West Northumberland, there is only Alston and Whitfield. The other churches have only got 1 or 2 bells. And nobody's got lots of bells.
I've seen one in Preston with 4 bells. I mean, you could do a lot even with just 4 bells. Technically, of course, this is a chime. To count to the carillon officially, you have to have 23 bells. And also there's something called an eloquum chime.
All right.
Yes, which is played completely differently with ropes that you pull.
All right,
You don't pull them down, you pull them laterally, I think. is the term, obviously, which is a different movement, but it had its own repertoire, and they celebrated a multi-centenary a couple of years ago, and I took part in that. They invited all players of carillons and chimes to take part as well. So I did. They brought out a book about the Eloquim chimes, and St. Augustine's is in it. But I've always thought of this as a carillon because I play it as a musical instrument like a carillon. I think of it as a carillon, and I collect music for it as a carillon.
So now that you are a member of the Carillon Society of Britain, what are your plans and ambitions for the future?
Well, I'd like to develop this carillon in particular. I'd like to establish a regular development time during the week when I can practice, and the vicar here is very supportive, Mark Nash-Williams. I'd like to institute a time when I can come here and practice and develop new music and new repertoire so people can be aware of it happening. And I'd like to ask composer friends of mine to write music for this carillon. Yes, I'd also, staying in Alston for a moment, I'd like to forge connections with the local school and maybe talk to the teacher about developing a carillon composition programme with the students. That would be wonderful.
That would be excellent, wouldn't it?
Yes, they could get the experience of playing and writing music. But I'd be really interested in including people in the carillon development and getting people to play and contribute their own music and spread awareness of the instrument. Yes, and develop it in their own ways as well. Going beyond Alston, I'd like to play other carillons as much as possible. I've had the real honour of playing the Civic Centre carillon and of trying the Whitfield Church carillon. I'd like to play that again, actually, and see if I can get a feel for it as an instrument, because it is a musical instrument. It's just approached in a different way. I'd like to experience other carillons in Cumbria and further afield, and absorb as much music as possible. And the website of the Carillon Society of Great Britain and Ireland has a rich store of music which I've yet to explore.
All right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So that's all in the future for me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Brilliant. Josephine, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
This episode was inspired by a conversation with Mark Nash-Williams, Vicar of the parish of Alston Moor. I'm grateful to Josephine Dickinson and to John Bradley for their enthusiasm and generous support in making this episode, and to Sarah Blackett-Ord for helping us in our visit to the Holy Trinity Church in Whitfield. The first time we heard the Whitfield carillon, it was played by Kieran North. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and tell your friends about it.